being set up. Just want to say, I think I prefer a slightly more informal speaking style. So if anyone wants to interrupt, ask questions throughout, you have to wait till the end of questions. Like, I can see a few colleagues in the room, so if I've missed anything really important, just butt in. And if anyone who I don't know and doesn't work with me has anything to add, I would love any additional input. Thank you. Okay, great. So, yeah, my name is Suzy Lowi. I'm a senior clinical research practitioner at Hammersmith Hospital. I don't know if any of you know what that means. My job title is a bit weird sounding. I'm basically not a nurse, but I do a similar job to a research nurse. And my background is kind of sciencey. I come from a biochemistry background. So I'll be talking today about research in sickle cell disease with a bit of focus on some of the barriers that people face and how you can maybe try and break those down. This is my lovely team. And you've met Stephen, he's in the room today. So all of us work together to try and help run the clinical trials department at Hammersmith Hospital, which falls under Imperial College. Oh, let me let this person into the room. That's all right. So I think a lot of you in this room probably know more about sickle cell than me, to be honest, but just a quick overview of why it matters that we're working on this particular condition. It affects 18,500 people roughly in the UK, with around 300 babies born every year who are affected by it. And that number increases dramatically to around 20 million worldwide. So that's why it's so important that we find better treatments and a better quality of life for people living with this condition. And to be honest, I think even if these numbers were a fraction of that, even if it was just one person, I think rare conditions and rare diseases still matter. It's not just about the numbers. I think it's obviously significant that it affects 20 million people worldwide, but even if it was 20 people, we should still be doing everything we could to try and help their lives better. I'm actually going to jump ahead to a later slide, then come back, because I didn't put these together, but I like this one as a starter one. So what is research? I don't know if any of you are already familiar, if all of you already know this. But research isn't just clinical trials. So that first slide that I'll go back to focuses on clinical trials, which is the main part of my job. But I just want to take a moment to talk about observational research. So a lot of you associate research and clinical trials with giving people new and experimental drugs, but that's not all it is. That's not even half of the picture. Observational research is something that we do to try and better understand the experiences, the lived experiences and quality of life of people living with different conditions. And it says here it's a one-time visit, but it's not always a one-off. But yeah, it could be things like questionnaires, blood tests, saliva samples, and all of that helps build a better picture of exactly what's going on, because we can't find better treatments and cures unless we actually understand the situation as it is. So to take part in research, to contribute to improving the health outcomes of people living with sickle cell, you don't have to be willing to take on huge risks of side effects and experimental drugs. You could just fill out a questionnaire one time, and without knowing it, you might be massively contributing to the improvement of sickle cell treatments years down the line in the future. And a lot of this is to do with genetics. So a lot of the saliva samples and blood tests will be looking at to see if there's links between different genes and genetic markers, and then looking at side by side with the questionnaires to see how people have reported what their symptoms are, what their experiences are, and looking for connections to see if we can actually start to predict how someone might experience sickle cell from just a simple blood test or saliva sample. So it might be that they could find, so one of the things they might be looking for in one of the research studies that we run is if there's any genetic predictor of whether someone might, for example, experience acute chest syndrome when they have a crisis versus not, or whether they might have a better response to a certain drug based on their genes. So there's a lot of things to be discovered through research, as well as just testing the drugs. And the second type of research is obviously clinical trials. So this one is looking into new experimental medication to see if it can help treat and hopefully one day cure sickle cell disease. So to go back to an earlier slide, what is a clinical trial? It's the development of a new treatment, and that starts always in the lab. So it's academic research in places like universities and science labs, where they will come up with an idea for a drug that might treat a disease theoretically. Then it needs to be tested in animals first to check that it's safe and effective. Then there's early phase human studies, so first in human studies, which means they're probably trying to find what's the best dose and what's the safest and most effective. So the balance between side effects and effectiveness, basically. And then the later stages come when our team would offer it to people in clinics, when all of that has already been established, and we're looking to see how well it works against the current gold standard of treatment or placebo. It varies between trials, different designs. And then finally, when all of the research is completed and it's proven to be effective, hopefully, then it's approved by the MHRA, and niacin becomes a standard of care medication that everyone can be offered. But obviously, there's a lot of historical issues with access to research and inclusion in research. So some of it is logistical things that could affect everyone and anyone, even just attending hospital visits. Like, research is my full-time job, which I do 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. I can only treat someone in a clinical trial in those working hours, which is often their working hours. So you have to be able to give up a lot of time, travel, money to be able to do these things. And we appreciate that that's not easy for everyone and can be a bit of a burden. A lot of it is to do with information as well. So clinical trials can be quite heavy on the scientific, medical wording, and it's a lot of information to digest. And some people find it a bit overwhelming, and getting the information across effectively in the best language can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. And then I'm going to bring on to something a bit more relevant to sickle cell, which is mistrust in healthcare, which is a common theme. Okay, I think maybe we'll quickly skim over to the studies that we have open, but obviously there's a massive conversation to be had about systemic racism in healthcare and building trust in every community to make sure that research is diverse. Because if we don't test out medications in a wide range of population, then how do we know that it works in them? And that's a huge issue, which I wish I could talk more about. Maybe there'll be more time later to touch on this subject. Just to quickly let you know what opportunities we currently have available. So we've got the Hibiscus clinical trial, which looks at a medication called etavopivat, which is an oral tablet taken once a day, which is hopefully going to reduce painful crises. And these are all the different hospitals where you could enroll in this clinical trial. In London alone, quite a few options. And Dream, similarly, it's an oral tablet taken once a day. So a lot of these might be a good, convenient option for people that don't want to come in and have surgery or IV drip. So yeah, this one is very, very new. We've just opened and started recruiting to this one. And this one is actually hopefully going to be, well, not a curative treatment, but how would you phrase it?
Disease modifying treatments. It will modify disease, but unfortunately doesn't cure.
Exactly what Stephen said. And this one is currently only open at our hospital, but there's others coming soon. This study has literally just opened as well, so we've got a lot of very new ones. So there's a lot of emerging treatments all the time, which is really exciting. I'm probably coming to the end of my 2 minutes. But yeah, so we have a lot. So this one's an injection that's given underneath the skin, so it involves maybe a bit more hospital visits, but different types of trials suit different people. For example, the redress trial is haploidentical stem cell transplant, which is obviously much more invasive than taking a tablet at home every day, but it's obviously a very exciting potential opportunity for a lot of people. So yeah, if anyone you know would be interested in taking part in clinical trials, it would be best to discuss it with your consultant. They can help find out which ones are suitable for you, which are the best options for you. It's not a decision to be taken lightly, and taking part in research is something that I think is quite altruistic. It's obviously something that has the potential to benefit the individual taking part, but because of things like placebo control, it's something that ultimately is a very kind act to help benefit future generations of people with sickle cell. And I think it's a wonderful thing to do if it's right for you. And our job isn't to persuade people to take part in research, it's to give them the tools and information that they need to make the right decision for them. I think that's a nice line to finish on. I've talked about observational research, so this is just 2 examples of those kinds of studies that we have that look at quality of life through questionnaires and simple non-invasive tests. And I just want to thank you for listening. Sorry, it was a bit quick and a whistle-stop tour, and I had to brush over subjects that I would have liked to have gone more depth into. But these are some contact details if you want to reach out to us and find out any more. Again, my name is Suzy Lowi, research practitioner. This is my team lead, Tung Lee, and his details over here. And thank you very much for listening. And we have a question, if I'm allowed to take one. Yeah, hello.
So historically, research seems to favour people with SS, and I'm wondering, with everything you're speaking about, is it only focused on SS, or do you actually look at other sickle cell types?
I don't know. Oh, yeah, this one's on as well. And that's a very good question. I don't have all of, for every single study I work on, I haven't committed it to memory, but some of them, unfortunately, do favour certain genotypes, and others are a bit more open to different types. So it depends on the study. It's like a case-by-case basis. And I have a colleague who might be able to give a better answer to this as well.
Yeah, so there are a couple of the studies that were mentioned today are open to SC patients as well. So the CSL, which is the injection that you have once every 2 weeks, and etavopivat as well, I believe. So the tablet that you take once daily is also open to patients with SC.
Thank you. Any other?
We can take one more question if there's anyone who would like to know more. Okay, and just so you know that Suzy will be at the stall there later on today, in case you have burning questions that needs answering about research. I'm just curious about the hibiscus one.
Hibiscus. Let's get the details up. I'm a visual learner. Yeah, what were your questions about the hibiscus trial?
Yes, I know hibiscus is kind of a fruity, flower thing. So I'm just curious about the hibiscus in it. It's just the name.
Yeah.
This is what I wanted to know, yeah.
So the
Because
next,
I know hibiscus is something I drink every day. Hello?
if only
Thank you.
it's to do what it needs to do. But no, the drug company have named all their trials after flowers.
See,
So that's why they're all named as their name, but there's no.
That's okay. It's a shame because my daughter drinks it every day. I'm gonna make a testimony today, and we started like 2 months ago. So she has her blood exchange every 6 weeks. She went down to Guy's hospital and had her blood test, and the consultant mentioned, "Oh, we need to, you always get you at 6 weeks, right? We need to upgrade it to 7 weeks because your sickle levels have gone down a bit." I said, okay, that was a good suggestion, but then we need to adjust it back to 6 weeks so that we can align it to your normal regulation. And I said, hang on, is it not a good thing that it went to 7 weeks? That means something good is happening. And to be honest, I can 101% sure it's hibiscus drink.
So I think it's one of you were at our last event
Yes.
where we talked about the importance of lifestyle, particularly what you eat and what you drink and the impact that has on your sickle. I think that's really, really important. It's something that we as sort of healthcare practitioners, we kind of brush over. But we know that the nature of sickle is it creates an environment that means that the cells are more likely to break down for a variety of reasons. And if you can modify your diet and have an antioxidant, because it's an oxidative disorder, if you can increase your diet so you have a more antioxidant diet, then it's logical to think that could improve your sickle cell. I think that's the only thing you do, but I've met patients who sort of juice, and they do a lot of juices, and they eat more healthily, and it transforms their sickle cell completely. So I think what we need to do is we need to understand that better. We need to do the work to better understand it. We need to do the research so that rather than just saying, oh yeah, this works and maybe that works and maybe the other works, we can say things definitively and we can offer people advice. And this is these events are trying to do, trying to offer people advice and empower them so they can make the changes that will benefit them in their disorder. So I think things like that about what you eat and what you drink is so important for this sort of disorder. There's a lifelong disorder. And so that's some of the work that we need to do to improve it. But it's a really good point.
All right, thank you. Now I get the hibiscus.
And can I just quickly add to that? I think this just shows the importance of observational research alongside clinical trials, because we can talk all day about these exciting new medications, but it's the day-to-day, often like simple or overlooked things that might actually be making massive improvements to people's day-to-day lives. And like Stephen said, we need more research and funding into observational research, so we have the scientific papers and the evidence on paper to back it, so it can become actual like national guidelines and things like that. And just back on the naming, some clinical trials have very silly names that don't correlate with what the study is. It doesn't mean that that's the drug. They often name them based on acronyms, so like the nice acrostic poems that we heard today. It's sometimes the study has a very long title, and they just pick random letters out of a sentence because it makes a nice word together. So yeah, don't read too much into the titles. And sorry that if we misled anyone with the titles of any of the studies that we mentioned today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Suzy. An applause, a major applause. I can tell you, I do have hibiscus teas. And I add a lot of spices to mine, like cinnamon, ginger, pimento, cloves, and honey, because it's really nice as a cold drink. Yes, but it tastes really, really good. Thank you, Suzy, and thank you, everyone, for your attention and listening to Suzy's presentation on Introduction to Research. Next, we will have two individuals speaking on lived experience with clinical trials. And to be able to read anything on my phone, I have to take my glasses off or bring it down on my nose. So apologies. Taking it off. I didn't bring the computer glasses today. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the platform Kula Tucker, who's a patient and carer, and Anika Sodiende, who's a patient. Ladies, I'm so excited to hear about your experiences. Yes. Oh, it's not to rush you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kula Tucker. Hi, everyone. I'm Arika. I'm a mom to 3 kids, 2 of which have sickle cell and SS, sickle cell anemia. And both of them have taken part in clinical trial. So I'm under the team at Evelina, St. Thomas's. And I can honestly say, we all ask for medication every day, better care, better medication. But if we don't take part in the trial, how do we expect to get the medication out there? How do we expect people to sponsor the medication? That's my view of it. That's why I have taken part in it. And yet there are risks. Of course there are. My 8-year-old was in a clinical trial with the same trial as my daughter. It was going amazingly well with my daughter. No health complication, nothing. In fact, her crisis level dropped because we're in hospital every month or so. When she was on the trial, her crisis literally, it took us over 2 years. While she was on it, we didn't have any admission at all. My son was they put him on the same clinical trial. Unfortunately, it didn't work for him. He had one of the biggest crises while in the hospital doing the trial. So, but as parents and carers, we have to be open-minded and be willing to take the risk. Yes, it's a risk. I asked the question, is my child going to die? Which we are all terrified of. How will this impact her life? How, the risk. Every parent will ask that. But I think it's the trust in your team, the doctors, you have to trust them. You have to trust that they've gone through everything. They will not offer something that would deliberately hurt your child or hurt you as an adult. They will not. And I saw that when my son had the crisis while on the track, and I could see them. Some of them were in tears because for them it wasn't just a job. They were looking after a person. They took this, they take them as a human being. So they felt it because they were all hopeful that it will work the same way as it worked for my daughter, but it didn't. And these are some of the risks we have to be aware of. One thing could work for this person and it will not work for another. But as parents, carers, patients, we really do. We cannot just ask for something if we're not willing to give it a trial and see how it's going to improve our lives. That's my take on it. And I only come to that because I know the team are with me. If I have any question, it's a phone call away, it's a text away, and they always respond to me. That builds confidence in me, and they break down. It's not that they convince me to do it, it's because I trust them. I trust that they will look after my kids. I trust that they're going to be there. Even when I'm at home, I'm not in hospital, I can call, hey, I'm not sure about this, or she's feeling this way. They'll say, oh, don't worry, monitor her or bring her in or do this or do that. I will not advise any patient if you don't have that communication with your team, you don't have that trust, don't take part. Because it all comes down to it. We are playing with lives. Yeah? Have the trust with your team, but also be open-minded to take part in this trial because that's the only way we're ever going to have cure, better treatment.
I'll give a little bit of background about myself and then go on to how I started at the trial. So I feel like I've lived a pretty normal-ish life, even though I would have some civil crisis and maybe it's not that normal. I went to boarding school at like 11 and I was there for 7 years. I would be hospitalized like every year. I finished uni within the 3 years. I also got a job in the normal timeline as well. But even in the uni experience, I had like 3 surgeries, so it was kind of difficult. But I would get pains from time to time, and I would be admitted, obviously. But then after uni, it starts to get quite bad. And then I started taking hydroxycarbamide. I wasn't taking it before. And I thought that it would be like a sort of magic pill that would cure everything, and it didn't. I kept on having really bad pains. I kept on going to hospital. I didn't want to do an exchange transfusion because I felt like it would disrupt I work in finance, so I felt like it would disrupt my work too much. And trust is very, very important because Dr. Money has been my doctor since I was 18, so that's quite a while now. And I just spoke to him and I said that like we have to do something. I can't keep being in pain like this. And we checked to see if my sister was a match, and she wasn't a match for bone marrow. So when the topic of the trial came up, it sort of felt like it was my only hope. And knowing that it was a medication that's been made for sickle cell specifically was also really great as well. So in my head, I thought there's no sort of bad side to this. Either it helps me or it helps other people, but we'll still make progress either way. And I'll be closely monitored. If I'm getting crises, then my doctors are going to know. So I saw it as a win-win. And I think like 2 days ago on Thursday, I've been on the trial now for a year, which is great. And this year, everyone is on the medication. I think I'm already on the medication, but everyone is on the medication now. And it really does give a lot of hope. Apart from actually helping physically, it's really nice to know that the researchers are trying to help with this and they're actually trying to find a cure. Sometime last year, I was almost not allowed to be on the trial anymore. And I don't think I realized how much it meant to me to actually be on it and how much of a lifeline it felt like. But the team are really lovely. The research team are great. They'll take like really good care of you. You can ask them questions whenever you want. You can ask your doctors questions whenever you want. And it feels really supportive. So yeah, I agree. I think that everyone has to be sort of open-minded to it. It can be a bit scary. It does feel like a guinea pig sometimes. They take a lot of blood and I do ECGs and echoes, but it's like little in terms of actually helping to improve quality of life and longevity. So yeah, my experience has been really good.
Questions in the meantime? Very inspiring for both of you. And can I just ask what type of trials were you on? My favorite. And yourself, your son?
I've been on a couple. The one I was talking about has been discontinued. It was the medication last year that they stopped and.
And what's the name of it?
I can't remember. Pardon? That, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that one I'm aware of it, yeah.
Yes.
Because my daughter was one of the first trials at her main hospital, but it didn't work for her straight away. She went into full-blown crisis after the infusion. So I think after less than a year, they took it off. Yeah. So the other one for your son?
It was the same one. I believe they were both on the same trial. My daughter did another one, but that one she was on a placebo and she was a lot younger. I can't exactly remember the name. But the one 2 years ago, that one has been discontinued. It was, I can't remember the name, but we have to go into hospital and give it through the IV drip. Yeah. And they started with people under the age of or over 10 or 12. And then later on, my son was eligible to go on it. Unfortunately, it worked perfectly well with my daughter.
Wow.
But like your daughter, it didn't work.
Trying to run with the mic. I'm coming.
Good morning. Can you explain to us, to clear and give more information, when they stop a drug and you're on a trial, how do you feel, how it affects you, and what are the plans going forward for you without that drug, or is that going to be continuous, still available to you or not? Can you give us some sort of insight about that?
Okay. Unfortunately, because it's a trial and it gets stopped, just because you're on the trial doesn't mean you get to continue. If it's stopped, for whatever reason, it has stopped. You cannot do anything. And trust me, I was really, really upset because it was working so well for my daughter. We were out of hospital 2 years straight, no crisis. For me, it was like the miracle I was looking for because, like I said, she was in hospital all the time. And unfortunately, when the trial stopped, I think 2 months after that, she had huge crisis. And it kept going on and on and on. And last year was one of the worst years she's 12 in her life. When that medication stopped, we were in hospital for 9 days or almost 2 weeks. That's when she was diagnosed with autoimmune liver disease, possible IBD, all sorts of complications, came up soon after that trial stopped. Her body was just not responding to the hydroxy that she was on because just the hydroxy was not working anymore for her. So things just took a turn. Right now she's on blood exchange. Touch wood, it's working fine. And my son is not on any trial at the moment. He's still on just the hydroxy. And honestly, I am open to put him on something that will work better for him because he has so much energy. He wants to play football. He wants to just be a boy, And I would love anything that could help him achieve those, be him, So if something comes that is better than hydroxy and I have to put him on the trial, I will. Not because I'm willing to just risk my kid's life, but I'm willing to trust that it will help. I'm open to trust. I trust my team that they have gone through his file, they've done their study, they have done their research. They know this is not gonna harm my child. This is not gonna kill this child. This is not gonna make his situation worse than it is. I'm open to it just because of that trust and the hope that I have.
I just want to say I'm so sorry for what's happened with your daughter first. Second thing I want to say is I think it's quite disturbing that a drug that's supposed to help her actually gave her more than what she had.
No. It wasn't the drug.
Okay, fine.
It wasn't.
But
No. It wasn't.
my point is though, that when they decide to pull a drug, surely there's better ways of pulling it, because there's lots of people that I know who've been on either Voxelotor or the Chris Milligram, I can never say that name. And they're just pulled from the drug just like that. And I just think it's not just about the physical, it's also about the mental well-being of that person. Because if you're gone from being really well under a drug to it being pulled, and then all of a sudden you're straight back into, and in some cases worse, because the severity of the crisis after being pulled is like humongous, right? So I don't know what the answer would be, but I just think it would be great if there was a better way of stopping a drug with a patient and making sure that their well-being is looked after and not just cutting that drug. Yeah, I'm directing it to the researchers. Yes. Yeah. So please consider that. And you know, people's well-being is like the paramount.
Yeah, so I take on board everything you're saying. I think with the crizanlizumab and the Voxelotor story, they're different, but kind of, I don't know, follow the same theme. Is that the work wasn't done properly? Because I think it's important that if a drug gets pulled, that it's done in a way that's sort of sympathetic of those who are involved in the trial. But to be perfectly honest, I'll go more basic than that. Say what we should do is do the work properly so that we don't pull any drugs. Do we know all the drugs that we do introduce, and this is the problem with crizanlizumab, and your description of your children on that drug is really important, because we know that about a third of the patients who were on crizanlizumab didn't really respond, it didn't really make any difference. A third got worse, and only a third got better. And in Suzy was talking about the different phases of the trials. In the phase 3 studies that were done post-COVID showed that it was no better than placebo. So we just thought, what's the point in this drug that's actually no better than a dummy drug? So that's why it got withdrawn. But the reason that happened is because the trials weren't designed properly, the work wasn't done to ensure that we delivered a drug. And I remember when it first came out, there was sort of held as if nuke your sickle and blah, blah. And then within a year, it went. And then the same thing with Voxelotor. The trial wasn't designed very well. And as a consequence, people started to run into problems. And the crizanlizumab story was one that had to happen. The Voxelotor story also did. But the way in which it was done, there were people in the audience who were on Voxelotor and got really angry. Because it was just one day we were told we had to go and take the drug away from people that were responding really well to this thing. So I think the way your point about the psychological impact of drugs being withdrawn is a really important one. And I know speaking to the drug companies have learned that lesson. I hope they have anyway. But we need to do what you're talking about, is to develop better drugs so that we have something better than blood exchangers or hydroxycarbamide. We need to be able to offer people more. And that's why the trial is so important. Exactly. Yeah. You're preaching to the converted.
So I've actually got a question for Stephen or Suzy. What are the protocols now in place when a pharma company decides to pull a drug that's being used for trial? What are the hospital's responsibilities to the patients who are on those trials, and how are you supporting those responsibilities?
So it really depends on why the drug's been withdrawn. So if the drug gets withdrawn, then the drug's withdrawn. We have no choice. We have to comply with those sort of orders, because normally drugs are withdrawn either because they don't work or they're unsafe. So there's no benefit in leaving your patient on a drug with either of those. But as I said, the more fundamental questions are how we do all of it and making sure that it's done in a sympathetic way. There aren't any sort of protocols for how a drug trial is withdrawn if there were issues. But I think it's just the way to speak specifically about the Pfizer Voxelotor debacle. we've just done so badly. We got calls. I remember getting an email at 11:30 at night saying the next day this drug is going and you need to go and take it away from your patients. That is a disaster for a drug that actually worked. And just be mindful that DREAM is Zosivalet, or the new iteration of that drug. And we're very hopeful that's going to make a difference to people's lives. So simple answer to your questions. I don't think there's any sort of hard and fast way in which these drugs are withdrawn, but I hope that we don't have to sort of approach that question anymore. The next one that comes, and I'm sure it'll be well lauded, the next one that comes doesn't get withdrawn. Just starts to do what it needs to do and help people in their journey.
Yeah, could I also state what highlights quite clearly is the failure of the drug company in the first place, then a failure of the regulators for in this instance. And how have they acknowledged that? And what has been put in place to prevent that repeating itself? There's so much in this, and in some way, so many ways that affect each and every individual who's been on this. And I do believe in that process between the drug companies and the regulatory bodies, how much is the patient voice and how strong is patient voice in those two systems, and how much power do they have within that system? Because after all, they're the one who's affected. They're the ones that needs to be readdressed. And how has that been done, if that's been done? And again, the way forward is to prevent these things happening. Maybe the patient voice ought to be stronger. So therefore, they are well aware and maybe could flag up things before it gets dangerous. As you just said, you got an email at one evening saying it's going to be withdrawn next day. Now, if the patient voice would go, I'm sure that wouldn't happen. So it's a case of learning and being collaborative going forward to prevent these things happening, and ensure that it's all about the patient experience is much improved.
There was a lot to unpack there. So I just think, so for the patient voice, you know, I'm a big fan of making sure that patients are involved in every element of the disorder, specifically in the development or the design of a clinical trial. And I think that's the bit that needs to work better. The regulatory authorities, they do consult with patient groups, but actually they are a very sort of cold organization that deals with facts, whether this works, whether it's safe and important. Those are really important things, and that's what they do. As for the drug companies, I've had a lot of conversation with Pfizer post voxelotor. They realize that they made an error. They realize they have a lot of work to do to try and rebuild trust within the Sickle community. And I'll take them on their word. They are doing what they can to try and build that trust again. So I think the bit that I think is most important is having patients involved, not just as a token gesture, but actually engaged in the development of drug, the clinical trials, and actually all the way through the process to ensure that that patient voice is strong all the way through the whole, every element of the process. And that's probably all we can do for that.
I'm sorry, I just have a couple of things that are based on some of these discussions. I think, yeah, you've just asked something that I was going to mention anyway, if it didn't come up. It's patient involvement, and it is something that is now being built more and more into every single trial at the very early stages. So we will not open a clinical trial or offer information to anyone until it has been reviewed and feedback has been given by patient representatives to say, you know, this bit makes sense, this bit doesn't, this works, I'm not sure about this bit. And we have the active engagement conversations with patients before anything is taken to the opening to recruitment stage. So it's something that's being built more and more into our day-to-day work, whereas maybe it didn't used to be. So we're constantly trying to improve, constantly looking for new ways to involve the patient voice at every stage of the process. And we also are very, very keen to get feedback from patients about their experiences in clinical trials, not just patients, carers, parents. All of these voices are absolutely paramount to us doing our jobs better, because we know there's so much room for improvement all the time, and we really value hard to hear constructive feedback as well, so we welcome that. And I also just wanted to touch on the fact that it's really hard at this stage to offer a kind of individualized personal experience on something like a clinical trial, because we are working to these protocols that are international. And you know, it's a really tough question. Why is this working for one person and not for another? We don't have answers, and that's why we're doing the research, and that's why we need to collect as much information as possible about everything going on with someone on a clinical trial. What's going on in their wider life? Could it be related to diet, exercise, stress, other medications they're taking, age, sex? It could be all kinds of things, and we just need to keep investigating, asking questions before we can understand why something might be benefiting one person more than another. And I just finally wanted to make another point about how when people take part in research, they're part of a massive global project, and it's something that maybe you don't think about on a day-to-day experience. You walk into our hospital, we see you in one afternoon, and it feels like quite a local experience, but everything on a clinical trial is linked to something on the other side of the world, hundreds of patients in all kinds of countries doing the same thing. And that's why it can feel maybe like a shock when a drug gets pulled in this country because of results from data in a completely different continent. But that's just the way it works with research. It's this big international effort, and we might not understand why things are happening here on the ground because of something that's happened on the other side of the world. And maybe that's something we're not very good at communicating with people, and maybe that's something I'm going to take back from today and make sure that patients understand when they're involved in a research project. It is a huge project, and yeah, it can be very, very complicated and hard to digest at times. So we're going to try and do our best to make sure we're passing on information, keeping people updated, and answering questions as best we can. And I just want to take a moment to thank you two so much, Kula, Arike. It's so appreciated that you gave up your time today and shared your experiences, good and bad, about taking part in research. I don't know how much time we have, and if we can ask.
We've got time for potentially 2 more questions. I've got it. It's been here has been waiting for a bit.
Yes, given that the sickle cell community, it's always the case of most patients eventually have to speak from personal experience. Now, I was just wondering how, you know, whether there's a coordination between the pharmaceutical industry and the hospital departments. Because, for instance, I mean, the way drugs interact, it may be the case that patient also being seen by the renal department or the cardiovascular department means that they're having to take certain medications, certain drugs. And in that case, is there some kind of a concerted effort to put a lot of emphasis on treating the complications? For instance, the complications from the cardiac perspective or from renal perspective, and whether it's more important to, whether it's less important about the drugs coming from the hematological department or the sickle cell drug specifically, or the improvement of the patient is to be passed on to the renal department, and the drugs they take from the renal, or the drugs they take from the cardiovascular perspective. And is that kind of what is there the kind of a movement within the pharmaceutical industry as well as the hospital departments to decide in which area to put the effort on, and so in which way to manage, because essentially there are those who are thinking about, you know, cure, and there are those who are thinking the school of thought who think it's not about cure, it's about the management. And the management will mean that we put a lot more effort into the complications that arises through the other aspects of the human body and the other treatments we have to go through.
Stephen is ready to answer.
I'm not sure, man. So
I know, yeah, you
it's, so the way, Suzy did this talk about the way in which the clinical trials are designed. The clinical trials are designed really quite meticulously to ensure that we look for any potential risks. And you talk about risks and trying to balance the risks and the benefits. Now, sickle is a multi-system, multi-organ disorder. So some of our patients unfortunately do have kidney, heart, liver problems that have to be taken into account when considering whether that patient is appropriate for a clinical trial. And we have very strict guidance on those elements of it. And also, once they've been enrolled in that clinical trial, these monitoring visits, these regular visits that people come to be reassessed is to make sure that the, obviously to make sure, see if the drug is doing any good, but also to make sure it's not doing any harm. And the inadvertent effects of the drug is that it's actually starting to cause deterioration of one of those organs that are functioning. So that bit is there. That bit is already in place. But I think what is really important is that we don't, there are certain things that we don't consider enough. And I know we're doing it more now, but I always sort of feel that we don't think about the psychological impact of being in clinical trials, the psychological impact of these drugs that we're giving people. Because as doctors, I speak for myself, as doctors, often the focus is on the physical and not so much everything else. So I think I take on board all you're saying, and I think we really do need to do a lot more to make sure that, well, actually, we are doing quite a lot to make sure that these drugs aren't causing any harm. But I think singular focus on the psychological impact. And that's why these observational studies and a lot of the drug companies are now using sort of quality of life index and all these other things. See, actually, is this drug, if the drug brings your hemoglobin up by 20 grams. That's great, but if you're still feeling rubbish, then who cares? You know what I mean? So we kind of need to make sure that we're taking into account the person as a whole, as opposed to focusing on the physical and not everything else. But we are doing those things. That I can reassure you of. That we're very hard on monitoring all of those measures that you're talking about.
My question would be, I don't know if Suzy touched on it with racism. Why has it taken the medical field so long to come up with treatments, cures, you know, with regards to sickle?
I don't find the best place person in the room to talk about racism, but I will just quickly mention that Stephen has done a fantastic video on this. There's a documentary that you can watch free online on YouTube about mistrust in healthcare and some of the historical and social factors that have gone into this over the last few decades, hundreds of years even. I think I want to mention something completely unrelated to sickle cell as an example of, I think, inadvertent racism and bias in the development of new healthcare, not just medication, but I want to talk about medical devices. So, you know, these pulse oximeters, the clip that goes on your finger, it has been discovered years ago, I think it was in the 90s that it was first discovered that it's not as effective on darker skin as lighter skin. And the reason for that, it wasn't outright racism, it was that the device was developed and made in Japan, where there's much more consistency in the skin tone of the initial trials that they tested it on. So in terms of why do some drugs only work better on some people, or we haven't discovered if they're as safe or effective in some ethnic groups compared to others, sometimes it's because no one even thought to think, should we test this on a wider demographic? And that's why we have to be asking these questions now in a preventative, proactive way, so we don't end up with accidental, just because the local geographical area to that hospital was only recruiting people that live nearby who can access the hospital, and that was a certain group. That's a sort of unintentional, that's a lighter answer, but I'm going to pass the mic over to Stephen.
Conversation, but I think this is really, really important. I think we need to be at the table. So if we're not engaged and we're not involved in the discussions, then we often just get forgotten. And I think this is, well, there was an issue of systemic racism that just doesn't infiltrate healthcare, but infiltrates everything else, education, criminal justice, everything. So we just need to be mindful of that lens. But events like today, the work that we're trying to do to try and increase the profile of sickle are really important. We can talk about the historical stuff, but I think to a certain extent, we as a community need to move beyond that. We need to accept the fact that this has happened. We need to not forget that this happened, but we need to move on and say, actually, if we want new drugs, we need to get involved. If we want new therapies, we need to be there so that actually, rather than the pulse oximeter being used on just on Japanese folk, they need to be used on Black people. And I don't think, Suzy, I know what you're saying, but I don't accept the fact that it was developed in Japan. So the consequence, they just tested on Japanese people. They were going to use it elsewhere. If all they were going to use it was in Japan, then that's fine. But they didn't. So I think that's the bit. Black people often get forgotten. And the only way you can make yourself heard is by having a voice and having a united voice. And I think we are doing that better now. We need to keep on doing it even better than we did before.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to move on.